The highest-ranking Japanese officer captured during the Pacific War was caught on the island of Morotai, Dutch New Guinea, on August 6, 1945, 2 weeks before Japan surrendered. The fact that he was taken prisoner by troops of the 25th Infantry Regiment, 93rd Infantry Division, is what made that incident noteworthy. Over 90% of the 14,000 personnel of the division were African Americans. The 93rd's tale is one of triumphing over adversity. The 93rd had to contend with prejudice and discrimination at home, a white-dominated military institution that did not want them, and officers who did not want to command them. Most military groups just have to fight the enemy. Worst of all, the 93rd had to combat the pervasive notion that black WW2 soldiers couldn't demonstrate exceptional bravery in combat. During World War I, the 93rd Infantry Division began as an all-black unit and demonstrated its strength in fierce engagements in France. But there were concerns about what to anticipate from 2,000 armed African Americans gathered in one location. Whether they would fight or how well they would fight were the most important questions. In battle, how successfully would they follow their white officers? Initially, thousands of troops from the 93rd were forced to perform manual labor exclusively for the Army, for whatever reason, the white-dominated, segregated U.S. The 93rd was seen by the Army in the same manner that American soldiers in general were by the British and French. Would any American of any race be able to fight and win a war in Europe? The American Expeditionary Force itself was nearly divided between French and British command structures when it arrived in France, but General John J. Pershing disagreed. In fact, some units did serve under the British, and black American units were under French leadership. Following its demonstration, the U.S., the Army was still unsure on how to handle the 93rd. No white officer wanted the command because black officers were typically thought to be incompetent. The French didn't hesitate like that. The 93rd was warmly received, but its 4 regiments were split up among 3 French divisions. The 371st and 372nd Regiments joined the 157th, Colonial Division. The 370th Regiment joined the 26th Division, and the 369th Regiment joined the 161st Division. Wearing American uniforms was the only American action that 4 units took after that. In addition to utilizing French weaponry, eating French rations, and fighting with French military strategies, they most likely picked up a good deal of French. They wore American clothes, but their helmets were the bluish-tinted Adrian helmet, a French design. The Adrian helmet patch in a black circle, silhouetted, replaced the 93rd's division patch. The 93rd was dubbed the Blue Helmet Division as a result. The 4 regiments that made up the 93rd spent more days in direct action than any other American division during World War I. With 191 days, the 369th was a week ahead of any comparable white unit. To demonstrate their achievements, the troops were awarded the French Croix de Guerre. The 93rd would have to repeat the experience 23 years after World War I. World War II's 2 black divisions. When World War II broke out, the U.S., the Army sent 68 infantry divisions, with each division typically having between 14,000 and 18,000 soldiers. By the beginning of December 1941, the African American press and some of its white counterparts were advocating for more black engagement in the anticipated conflict. Conversely, the U.S., the Army made its stance on racial integration quite plain. Determining social integration was a civilian sociological task. The issue was never intended to be military in nature. Only half of the Army's original plan for the expected war, 4 all-black divisions, were ultimately realized. The 92nd and 93rd Divisions served in the Pacific Theater and Italy, respectively. On March 9, 1944, another division, which would have been known as the 2nd Cavalry Division, arrived at Oran, Algeria. Once there, it was divided and dispersed in small groups, primarily in non-combat tasks and serving as support troops for bigger operations. The 92nd and 93rd would have to demonstrate the capabilities of the African American infantry soldier. Fort Huachuca's black units. The modern age of African American troops began in 1892, despite the fact that black battalions participated in both the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Within 20 miles of the Mexican border, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, is located in the south-central section of the Sierra Vista mountain range. In the past, Fort Huachuca was a western border fort that was ready to step in and deal with Mexican or American bandits and renegade Indians. In 1892, the 24th Infantry Regiment, colored, became the first Army unit to be billeted at the abandoned station. These 4 units were African American, or colored, and the 25th Infantry, 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments came next. The 10th Cavalry and the 25th Infantry were the main occupants of Fort Huachuca by 1939. By May 15, 1942, when the 93rd was sent there for military training, the instructors and drill sergeants were members of the 24th Infantry Regiment. The population of Fort Huachuca, a military installation prior to World War II, hardly ever exceeded 800, although it was set to rise significantly. Because Fort Huachuca was so isolated and out of the way, the Army thought that there would be less racial tension with any local civilian population, making it the ideal location for African American units. The Army was mistaken. There were frequently fatal altercations between white and black soldiers and citizens. Even in terms of medical care, Fort Huachuca was segregated, much like all other Army stations at the time. There were 2 hospitals, one exclusively for white patients and the other exclusively for black patients. With about 950 patient beds, the later facility was the biggest African American hospital in America, with exclusively African American medical staff. Naturally, officers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted ranks of both races had their own barracks, meal halls, and service clubs. Just over 900 dependents, including spouses, kids, and even some parents, were also brought by soldiers in the 93rd. Numerous complaints were made. "I'm basically fighting against slavery down here, sir." One 369th man informed a visiting black general, while another remarked, "The Jim Crowing of our outfit down here must stop." Generals William Spence and Charles P. Hall. It was widely believed that commanding a black unit was the kiss of death for a white commander, even though the enlisted men were black and the majority of the officers were white. Major General Charles P. Hall, a 55-year-old 1911 West Point graduate and World War I veteran of the 2nd Infantry Division, was appointed division commander. During the 93rd's nearly 4-year existence, Hall served as the first of 4 commanders, leading the 93rd through its 17 weeks of basic training, and any necessary advanced training was his responsibility. Most of his peers were not impressed by this. The fact that Hall was born and reared in Mississippi was one factor in his selection. Many of his military superiors believed he could relate to African American soldiers better than other candidates since he was from the Deep South. The Army was mistaken once more. Another Southerner with a North Carolina background, Brig. General William Spence, the artillery commander of the 93rd Division, received his appointment under similar circumstances. 14,000 enlisted troops made up the majority of Hall's newly created division. Its 883 officers included first and second lieutenants, with over half of them being black. The captain did not even salute the younger officer when a new black lieutenant reported to his white company commander. All he said was, "I hate Nyers." The transformation of the 93rd Infantry Division into a triangular division. Prior to the Second World War, the U.S., the 93rd Division now had 3 regiments, the 25th, 368th, and 369th, after the Army changed its organizational structure to the triangular idea, which meant that a division had 3 regiments instead of the 4 during World War I. The 368th was originally the 8th Infantry Regiment of the Illinois Army National Guard, whereas the 25th had been a regular Army regiment. The newly created 369th was primarily made up of draftees. There were 3 battalions in each regiment. Each of the 4 battalions in Brigadier General Spence's field artillery, the 593rd, 594th, 595th, and 596th, had 12 weapons, mostly 105mm howitzers. The 318th Engineer Combat Battalion, 318th Medical Battalion, 793rd Light Maintenance Ordnance Company, 93rd Signal Company, 93rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop, 93rd Quartermaster Battalion, A military police company and other support units were also present. With 60% draftees, 26% volunteers, and 14% transferred veterans, the Blue Helmet Division's manpower composition was similar to that of almost any other infantry division on paper. The 93rd's initial 17 weeks of training covered the fundamentals of soldiering, such as marching, close order drill, and the manual of arms, acclimating to barracks life and military discipline, etc., in accordance with the Army's regular instruction schedule. Training in infantry, artillery, or other specializations followed, lasting 13 weeks. The division was evaluated and advanced to the maneuver division level after proficiency was attained. That entailed participating in simulated war games with other divisions for 14 weeks. The final 8 weeks of specialized training, which concentrated on the potential direction of the chosen division, came next. Insufficiently well-educated troops. The difficulties and hardships of prejudice were a constant burden for the 93rd. Black soldiers in general, and the 93rd in particular, were disproportionately targeted by the Army's induction exam for military aptitude. Any recruit's professional path in the Army was determined by the results of the Army General Classification Test, AGCT. The test's fundamentals assessed a person's reading and comprehension skills. Class 5 had the lowest scores, while Class 1 had the highest. Since the majority of its members had only acquired a mediocre education, it appeared that the 93rd was doomed before it had even advanced past its basic training. Just 0.1% of the 93rd's 14,000 troops were classified as Class 1, but 45% of the division was classified as Class 5. 6.6% received a Class 1 rating, and 8.5% received a Class 5 rating within white divisions of the same encounter. The 585 black lieutenants in the division were also impacted by these biases. A college degree, which was uncommon among black people at the time, or completion of Officers Candidate School, OCS, were prerequisites for becoming a commissioned officer. The medical or chaplain corps mostly comprised the higher-ranked black officers, such as captains and majors. Many of these officers were transferred out once they demonstrated a high level of leadership and education and had the necessary skills for promotion. The white lieutenants who were assigned to the 93rd, some of whom had graduated from West Point, were unhappy with their assignment. Many of them were unable to be transferred out of Fort Huachuca in a timely manner. As a result, maintaining junior officer leadership in the 93rd that was qualified and competent became difficult. The Army wasn't the only organization with a race problem. The Navy and Marines both rejected African Americans in the years between World Wars I and II, and in the late 1930s, black people were allowed to join the Navy, but only as mess stewards. Following the start of the war, the American Negro press and a few progressive white publications started to criticize the military for not treating black people fairly, particularly in light of the lack of Negro education. One dispute was the level of education of the average Russian peasant soldier halting the Nazi advance in Western Russia. The average Japanese soldier in the Pacific was fighting quite effectively, but no one really knew how educated he was. Red Army versus Blue Army. The commander of the 93rd, Major General Hall, was bumped upstairs in October 1942 and replaced by Major General Fred W. Miller. He gave his staff the explicit directive to reduce the tasks and obligations of the black soldiers in the division. The men of the 93rd had desired a more American division patch instead of the French Adrian helmet silhouette. Since rattlesnakes were common near their Arizona home, it was one suggestion that was floated. An outline of the state of Arizona was another. The majority of the division chose a snarling Black Panther, Brig. General Allison J. Barnett, the division's executive officer, also voted in favor of the Black Panther emblem, but higher headquarters reversed the decision and insisted that the Adrian helmet be kept in place to honor the division's World War I heritage. In the sweltering heat of Arizona, the 93rd started its 17-week basic training regimen. Then came the 13-week coordinated unit sessions that were interdivisional. Then Governor Sidney Osborne of Arizona came up with a less-than-ideal plan. Since many of the physically fit field workers were away in the military or war industries, the division could be able to pick cotton in Pima and Maricopa counties when it wasn't training. The plan was finally squelched, despite President Roosevelt's belief that it had value. The military should go above and beyond to ensure that Negro soldiers are not the first to be used as farmers, and that, of all things, they should not be assigned to pick cotton, which to many represents a return to slavery status, stated one sociologist. On April 3, 1943, the 93rd left for the extensive 1943 Louisiana maneuvers after completing the bare minimum of basic training and participating in interdivisional war exercises. The 92nd, the other black division, took up residence in the abandoned Fort Huachuca during that period. The Blue Army and Red Army pursued one another through cities, up and down hills, and across swamps for 3 months. Fights frequently broke out because of the strong hostility between the 93rd and white units. It was believed that the 93rd started it all and faced some sort of punishment if the military police became involved. When 125 members of the 93rd gathered over 100 weapons and concealed them in case of an unforeseen race shootout, it was a turning point. Luckily, that didn't occur. Every element of the movements was evaluated by umpires. Major General Fred W. Miller, commander of the 93rd Division, said the 93rd performed rather well, neither exceptionally well nor unusually poorly. Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, the commander of the 3rd Army, concurred that the 93rd was effectively led and performed as expected. The 93rd's performance was also commended by Brig. General Benjamin Davis, Sr., America's highest-ranking African-American officer at the time. Before demonstrating that it was ready for overseas travel, the 93rd had one more chance. The 93rd Infantry Division's deployment to combat. The 93rd advanced westward into the Mojave Desert Training Center in Southern California, which faced up against western Arizona. This 18,000-square-mile area served as the last training ground for divisions before they were sent abroad. There were several camps in this desert training region. The 93rd relocated into a specially constructed segregated camp near Charleston, Arizona, that was created specifically for their convenience. While many believed a high-level conspiracy was at work, the 93rd was misled for months into thinking it was being readied for desert combat. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, America's top official, never supported an integrated army. Army Ground Forces Commander, Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, was one level below Marshall. When it came to deciding whether Army units were prepared for war operations, this 61-year-old West Point graduate from 1904 had the final say. He favored the disbandment of African-American divisions and the distribution of subunits to other units that were no larger than regimentals. American military commanders were almost entirely skeptical of the potential of any large African-American combat unit. Lieutenant General Millard F. Harmon, 59, a 1912 West Point graduate, was further down the chain of command. He was one of the first pilots in the Army Air Corps in 1916. While the 93rd was still training in the Mojave Desert, he became the Army Air Force's Chief of Staff by late January 1942, and ultimately oversaw the Army's ground battle operations in the South Pacific. He informed his commanders at the beginning of 1944 that he needed another infantry division, regardless of its color. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Douglas MacArthur's employer, was criticizing him at the moment. Roosevelt was under increasing pressure as commander-in-chief to respond to questions from the African-American and white press, including, why weren't there more black fighting groups in the war? It was decided by January 1944 that the 93rd Division would go to war. Low-level work and tasks. The 93rd was assigned to Californian troop trains. Pittsburgh and its busy Camp Stoneman Replacement Depot were located just east of San Francisco. When the 93rd arrived, they discovered that it was going to the Pacific Theater rather than the desert. They were led by their new commander, World War I veteran Meiji, General Raymond G. Lehman of Minnesota, 48. Soon to depart for Guadalcanal, the 93rd would face tremendous domestic pressure to commit black troops to combat. Major action had ceased on Guadalcanal more than a year earlier, and parts of the 93rd started to arrive there in February and March 1944. However, there were still sporadic traces of Japanese resistance fighters who could add interest to American life. As soon as the 93rd reached Guadalcanal, it was dismantled and its components sent to other areas under the direction of Majors General Oscar W. Griswold, commander of the 1st Corps. The 25th Infantry Regiment, one field artillery battalion, and a portion of the medical unit were still on Guadalcanal. In the Russell Islands, the 368th Infantry Regiment, 594th Field Artillery Battalion, and additional medical staff arrived at Banica. Selected units, including the 595th Field Artillery Battalion and the 369th Infantry Regiment, landed in the New Georgia Island Group. There wasn't much fighting on Wake Island, therefore other 93rd elements were deployed there. The 24th, an all-black regiment, had been on Guadalcanal since August 1943 and had previously shared quarters with the 93rd Division at Fort Huachuca. The majority of the black soldiers were assigned to service tasks like constructing roads, repairing bivouac grounds, or working as stevedores or dock workers who unloaded and reloaded ships. After finishing their responsibilities, the 24th joined the 25th Infantry Regiment for short training sessions in survival and jungle combat if time allowed. The 25th was also assigned to hard, monotonous work and nighttime guard duty along the perimeter of their bivouac camps, with the occasional combat patrol that took them into the forest. There was only the occasional Japanese air raid to keep things interesting. The Army repeated the same narrative to the black troops. The manual labor they were doing was essential and would keep them physically prepared for real battle. However, the 93rd gave up on ever experiencing battle and spent almost 14 months as a fragmented, dispersed division. The Solomon Islands Bougainville would be the site of their baptism of fire. The initial battle at Bougainville. Since November 1st, 1943, the battle for Bougainville had been fought intermittently against Japanese soldiers who had initially fought against the United States and then concealed in the bush. 3rd Division of the Marine Corps. The Marines were replaced on January 12, 1944, by the Army's 23rd Infantry Division, popularly referred to as the Americal Division. To join Americal's three regiments, the 164th, 182nd, and 122nd. The 25th Infantry Regiment was sent from Guadalcanal to Empress Augusta Bay on the southern end of Bougainville in late March 1944. The 25th's battalions would receive more intensive training in jungle combat and be assigned to an American unit. Compared to the California desert where the regiment had previously trained, the terrain and climate were very different. Additionally, the 24th Regiment's 1st Battalion was a part of the 162nd. The three battalions of the 25th Regiment, which were based out of a bivouac area right off the Torquena airstrip, began field operations with their American counterparts in patrols ranging in size from squad to platoon to company. Many veterans of the 25th would later remember the smell of decomposing animals and people, as well as rotting jungle flora. Many Japanese soldiers who were too sick or injured to keep up with their peers would scale a banyan tree and fasten themselves to it. He basically turned into a sniper who was affixed to the tree and stuck in place. Many snipers would perish in those trees without being caught, even if they weren't shooting an American. The 25th quickly regained its footing and started to function like an experienced unit after being eased into action. Private James H. O'Banner was the first 93rd Division enlisted man to kill an enemy soldier on March 31st during the strikes on Hills 500 and 501. An unruly patrol. April 7th, 1944 was the 25th Regiment's worst day on Bougainville. James J. Curran, the white captain of the 3rd Battalion's Company K, led 180 soldiers on a special patrol that day. Almost totally on its own, this specific adventure was the 25th's first company-sized operation. 2 Army Signal Corps photographers accompanied the regiment to record the event because it was considered a significant advancement for the regiment, if not the 93rd Division as well. Captain William A. Crutcher, an artillery spotter from the 93rd's 593rd Field Artillery, was another guest. The White Sergeant Ralph Broden of the Americal's 164th Regiment was the lone combat veteran among the 180 soldiers in this lot. The goal of the mission was to obstruct a trail that extended 3,000 yards past Americal's boundaries. It had long been known that the Japanese took this route. Curran's company headed out prepared, anticipating some enemy encounters. The patrol had 2 SCR-300 radios, 1 60mm mortar, 4 .30 caliber machine guns, and 9 Browning automatic rifle personnel. Curran led his company forward with the 1st platoon, as point when they set out early on April 6th. Both flanks received a portion of the 2nd platoon. Black Lieutenant Oscar Davenport, the company's second-in-command, led the 3rd platoon, which trailed behind. An abandoned enemy aid station was discovered by Company K when they arrived at a place approximately 2,000 yards from their line of departure. Curran ordered the 1st platoon to divide into finger patrols and advance further after securing the find. The enemy opened fire within minutes, then everything fell into disarray. The 3 platoons began firing in all directions during that first exchange of fire, and survivors would say that at least 3 enemy were killed. The 3 platoons were unable to see one another, much less who they were firing at or from what direction, due to the dense and densely overgrown jungle vegetation. When Curran radioed Colonel Everett M. Yon, the battalion commander, for orders, he was instructed to regroup, fall back 300 yards, reel in his company, and make a more planned advance. But that would never take place. Certain members of Company K believed that the English commands being shouted out by certain Japanese were actual ceasefire orders. James Graham, a soldier of Company K, claimed to have shot a Japanese soldier in the chest, hitting him square in the middle. "You got me," the dying Japanese soldier said in clear English. At the center of the firing, Lieutenant Davenport moved forward to restore order, but he was killed when he stopped to assist a wounded colleague. 9 other people were also murdered. During the 40-minute conflict, survivors would claim that Sergeant Ralph Broden was the only powerful, noticeable individual. He went around gathering soldiers and directing them to shoot or retreat. Despite being exposed to hostile fire on a regular basis, he managed to stay physically unharmed. At that point, the members of Company K discovered that the company's 1st sergeant, Captain Curran, and his radio man were missing. The 593rd fired 24 rounds on what was thought to be the enemy's concentrated gathering place at that point, and Captain Crutcher was calling in a spot-on artillery concentration. Survivors returned with 20 wounded at 5:30 p.m., leaving 10 companions dead where they had fallen. If Sergeant Broden hadn't shown such cool leadership, the numbers would have skyrocketed. 1 radio, 1 machine gun, 1 mortar with all of its rounds, 18 M1 rifles, 3 carbines, and a significant amount of abandoned personal gear were also left behind. No photographs were ever taken by the Signal Corps photographers, or at least none were ever released to the public. Looking into the disaster. The American Division believed it had carried out a comprehensive, impartial, fair, and non-discriminatory inquiry into the fiasco between April 14th and May 1944. According to the survivors' testimonies, Company K encountered little more than 24 enemy men, and Captain Curran reportedly left the battlefield with the 1st sergeant pursuing him. Numerous witnesses reported hearing English-language directives screamed from the enemy's direction. The soldiers didn't know who was actually issuing commands. A patrol from the 25th Company L, under the command of Lieutenant Reginald Hall, went out the following day to collect the bodies of those who had been left behind on April 7th. 1 soldier drowned while crossing a river along the route. Another member of Company L was killed in an ambush 75 yards from the killing field. After stopping there, the patrol left without bringing anything back to the base. On a second try the next day, Black Lieutenant Abner E. Jackson killed 40 men. When Jackson's soldiers arrived to the 2-day-old bodies, 30 of them refused to touch the dead. The corpses were wrapped in mattress covers by Jackson, 2 medics, and 2 sergeants. Only then would they be carried back by the 40. Additionally, they retrieved every piece of abandoned equipment, ammo, and weaponry they could locate. Ultimately, Curran had his own protection during the investigation. Still a captain, he was transferred out once the case was resolved, 2 black lieutenants were also booted away after being found to lack leadership abilities. Isaiah Adams and Leroy Morgan were charged with and convicted of defying instructions from the enlisted ranks. It's unclear whose commands those might have been, from other Americans or Japanese who speak English. Morgan and Adams were brought back to the United States. Oscar Griswold, commander of the Freenome Thieves Corps, accepted all evidence no matter how faulty, incomplete, biased, or prejudiced. He declared that the 25th lacked sufficient jungle training for both individuals and units. The junior-grade black policemen lacked initiative and were not inspired to do better, making them bad role models. According to Griswold, the 25th Infantry Regiment, which is representative of the 93rd overall, needed to be improved. Lieutenant Colders Yon supported Maj. General Raymond G. Lemon, the commander of the 93rd, who disagreed with Griswold's assessment. From beginning to end, the investigation was stacked against both the 25th and the 93rd. A pair of silver stars. Although the Corps and Division gave the 25th's performance a fair rating, none of the criticisms captured the 93rd's genuine spirit. A 15-man patrol from the 25th, for instance, encountered a group of Japanese with machine guns, and well more than twice their numbers in mid-April 1944. Private Isaac Sermon, with his bar, was in opposition to their machine guns. Sermon sustained a neck wound during the initial gunfight. He never gave up using his weapon, and that was the first of 4 wounds he sustained. As the unit withdrew, he continued to fire for 600 yards. He collapsed at that point because he was so weak from blood loss. He was brought back by his allies to recuperate from his injuries. In a different battle on May 17, 1944, 2nd Lieutenant Charles P. Collins of the 25th and a group of troops from the 93rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop led a patrol on Bougainville. 3 troopers were killed outright as a result of the superior enemy numbers and firepower. 3 others were hurt, although they were still able to move about a little. Collins was also momentarily blinded and became the 4th wounded. Believing that those who remained had been killed and their bodies were irretrievably damaged, the surviving men departed. Actually, all of the injured were gathered by Staff Sergeant Rothschild Webb. He led the troop in hiding in strongly enemy-infested areas for 3 days until they made it to their own lines. Webb and Sermon would be awarded Silver Star medals for their valor. A shift in authority and a press voice. The 93rd Division was affected by 2 occurrences at the end of the summer of 1944. When its commander, Major General Lehman, fell ill, 59-year-old Major General Harry H. Johnson, a 1916 Texas A&M alumnus and 36th Infantry Division World War I veteran, took over. Johnson had briefly served as the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, the African-American unit that was quickly disbanded upon arriving in Algeria. General Douglas MacArthur, Johnson's superior, gave him specific instructions before sending him to the Pacific from Italy. Without any concerns about its capabilities, MacArthur intended the 93rd to be transformed into a true fighting division. The second was that the American public responded favorably to newspaper articles about the 93rd's men's hardships, including those written by 51-year-old Walter F. White, Executive Secretary of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, its NAACP. White was also an accredited war correspondent with the War Department. All around the United States he could go. He would be permitted to report on the war by the Army. The Army had a struggle in resolving the issue in the Pacific as the voices of African Americans, highlighting the 93rd's problems, gained traction due to the increased backing of white Americans. After securing Bougainville, the 25th Regiment was sent to Finschhafen, New Guinea, in November 1944 to strengthen American positions there. The 24th Regiment left Bougainville in December 1944 to go to Saipan and Tinian, where they once more carried out garrison and mop-up operations. However, what did the 93rd Division have in store? The Halmahera Island Group in the Maluku Islands in eastern Indonesia held the solution. The island of Halmahera's Japanese resistors. The K-shaped island of Halmahera is located between West Papua and Indonesia, previously the Dutch East Indies. This 6860-square-mile island was reported to harbor between 3,000 and 4,000 Japanese soldiers by the summer of 1944, in addition to a few well-developed airfields. A spectacular return to the Philippines was Douglas MacArthur's ultimate objective in the Pacific. Morotai Island, located in the Maluku Islands in eastern Indonesia, 70 miles north of Halmahera, was a significant first step in that direction. Morotai was a stunning tropical paradise spanning 700 square kilometers, featuring white sand beaches, rocky mountains, and lush jungles. However, Morotai, which is 50 miles long and 26 miles wide, was generally not well liked by the Japanese. Despite the stunning scenery, the Japanese discovered 9,000 people living on the outskirts of mountainous jungles, with a diverse range of vegetation when they invaded the area in 1942. The flattest area of land, known as the Doroweba Plains, located in the southwest quadrant, and malaria was rife. It was a dumb idea to think that it could serve as a landing strip for Japanese aircraft. During the rainy season, the plains flooded excessively, and maintaining the airfield required too much time, effort, money, and labor. The Imperial Japanese Army only left a token presence of 600 to 800 soldiers on Morotai, whose entire existence depended on the sea lifeline to Halmahera, and fortified the larger, nearby Halmahera Island, which proved to be a far better setting for over half a dozen airfields and was easier to defend. Major Takanobu Kawashima was able to maintain his 2nd Provisional Raider Unit by relying on a steady flow of small boats, sometimes referred to as barges, that came and went. The people of Morotai would be left behind if that lifeline were ever severed. Bands of Japanese resistors could hide and survive on the area indefinitely if they were cut off from supplies from Halmahera, thanks to the dense jungle and jagged peaks. MacArthur's plan was to seize Morotai, which was located 850 miles south and slightly east of the southern tip of Mindanao in the Philippine Islands, while avoiding Halmahera entirely. He believed that an invasion would be relatively simple and, more significantly, would put him closer to the Philippines because he was aware of how weak and badly protected Morotai was. By the middle of July 1944, plans for capturing the island were being planned. With the help of MacArthur, the island would be populated with 6,000 Allied soldiers, its harbors would be greatly improved, fuel oil storage tanks would be installed, and an airfield named Wamadrome would be built at Pitu Airfield. Additionally, a 1,900-patient hospital system would be constructed. Tradewind Operation. MacArthur ordered the start of what was codenamed Operation Tradewind on August 15, 1944, and it was commanded by Lieutenant General Charles P. Hall, the former commander of the 93rd and commander of the Uchi Corps. Over 40,000 U.S., with assistance from the Australian and American air and naval forces, Army personnel readied themselves to strike the island. On September 15, 1944, the RAAF's 80th Fighter Wing and the 5th Army Air Force's fighter bombers, along with carrier aircraft from the Navy's 3rd and 7th Fleets, were to support Operation Tradewind. The primary invasion force would be the 31st Dixie Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, which was composed of the 124th, 155th, and 167th Infantry Regiments, all of which were a member of the Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi National Guard. Major Kawashima directed the Japanese garrison when the 31st Infantry Division surged ashore. His authorities on Halmahera specifically told him not to confront the Americans on the landing beaches and to retreat into the interior of the island. He was then instructed to divide his army into smaller units, no more than 12 to 24 in any one location. The Japanese found life increasingly unbearable after the Americans landed and started searching for the defenders. The U.S. patrol boat squadrons 9, 10, 18, and 33 were part of the 40 PT Boat Task Force 701.2 of the U.S. Navy, which continued to intercept barges. Additionally, the Americans urged Nippon's forces to surrender in Japanese over loudspeakers. It was somewhat successful, as a number of the ragged and hungry enemy surrendered. On October 12, 1944, the arrogant Colonel Kisou Ouchi, who commanded the 201th Infantry Regiment, assumed command of Morotai's defenses. His soldiers were joined by a few additional groups, including the Kempei Tai, a force of military police from the Japanese army. More covert, ruthless, and devoid of morality and humanity, the Kempei Tai were on par with, or worse than the SS and Gestapo of Nazi Germany. AZ Spring 2011 issue of W W2 Quarterly. Not much is known about Kisou Ouchi, who was hated by those he commanded, according to stories from those who gave up. He might have been raised firmly in the traditions of samurai warlords from a bygone era in Japan, and he asserted his upper-class privileges while his subordinates suffered. Every time better living conditions and food became available, he insisted on having it. Conflict between the Dixie and the Blue Helmet. The 93rd Infantry Division may not have been taken into consideration for any aspect of the action from the beginning. The decision to send the 93rd ashore at Morotai was finally taken on April 4, 1945, over 8 months after the start of Operation Tradewind. The Blue Helmet Division's troops had all but given up on ever seeing combat and being able to demonstrate that they were on par with any all-white division. They nearly missed their opportunity. Tension between his battalion and the 31st Dixie Division almost descended into a racial war, according to Nelson Peary, a black platoon leader in Company C of the 93rd. The 31st, which the 93rd was coming in to relieve, was described as the goddamnedest set of Ku Kluxers ever seen by a black sailor on the transport ship as the 93rd was en route to Morotai. The 31st declared that they would lynch anyone who looked at the women, army nurses, with crossed eyes. The landing craft got closer to the shore. Peary reported seeing a group of people on the shore, including the most forlorn group of Negro soldiers from a water filtration unit I had ever seen, a group of nurses from the hospital that had been set up nearby, and a group of white MPs from the Dixie Division, some of whom were carrying weapons. One of the forlorn black troops approached Peary once he was on the shore, and he appeared to be very happy to see him. Christ Jesus, seeing a black man holding a weapon makes me happy. Dude, what's wrong? A startled Peary answered. Here, we have been catching hell. These white people, who are military police, have all the guns and have been assaulting us. The rumor Peary had heard on the boat turned out to be accurate. He remarked, so they want to lynch somebody. The soldiers filing out of the landing craft caught my attention. It appears that the Dixie boys have been mistreating these men. Peary's platoon refused to accept it. Prepared for anything that may happen, the men clicked off the safeties and loaded their weapons. The atmosphere was going to catch fire due to its extreme heat. The white MPs were furious and prepared for a fight, while the nurses looked concerned. Disputes with MPs. According to a tense Peary, this was worse than combat. We were gathered for a massacre even though we far outnumbered them. On deck, the officers conversed uneasily. The sailors behind them looked around for protection. The white troops moved their armaments. We were more than what they had anticipated. All right, men, come in here, I yelled to the section as I turned my back on them. While his soldiers followed orders, a white MP who was intoxicated began to approach the gathering and prepare to unholster his. 5. However, when he noticed that the black soldiers had raised their weapons to fire position and were pointing them at him, he halted. According to Peary, the nurses screamed and fled for the hospital tents. The white soldiers dispersed in search of shelter. Company C men fled from the landing craft. Company C's Negro commander, Captain Williams, dashed between the groups. He drew his .45 from its holster and yelled for help. Our troops jumped to attention, lowering their guns. The frightened white soldier remained still. The inebriated white soldier complied with Captain Williams's command to return to his unit. Williams and the commander of the 368th 1st Battalion met briefly after he got on the scene. The situation was soon defused, and the white soldiers left the scene with a grousing expression. Peary said, "We marched to the edge of the swamp that the 31st Commander had designated as our bivouac area, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The tension between our soldiers and the white MPs increased instantly," he said. They were arrested and got into fights nearly every day. Our division headquarters relocated to the island just as the tension was about to explode. The senior commander on the island and our new commanding officer, General Johnson, assumed over. The bottom rail went to the top, and our military police took the place of the Dixie divisions. The black MPs were welcomed by the Dixie guys and a couple cracked heads. The 31st departed for the invasion of the Philippines before any significant issues arose. The first prisoner of war of the 93rd. When the 93rd arrived, they were not immediately assigned to battle. Instead, they were given the standard responsibilities of guard duty, unloading ships, and stacking supply heaps. This time, however, they worked almost shoulder to shoulder with their Australian colleagues. Finally, it was time for battle. The 93rd's 3 regiments would scour the southwest portion of the island for 2 to 3 weeks at a time in search of surviving Japanese prisoners. Wajaboea, Libano, and Sopi were their main focus regions. The location of the River Tijoe's discharge into the Pacific was one of special interest. For supply barges arriving from Halmahera Island, it was the preferred landing location. Men from the 369th Regiment killed 4 Japanese in a gunfight on April 15, 1945, while on patrol. The 93rd's first prisoner of war was brought in by the 369th 6 days later. During this time, the Imperial Japanese Navy continued to send barges to Morotai on a sporadic basis, with reinforcements and supplies. Ouchi's numbers appeared to have been rising. May 13th, U.S. 4 Japanese barges that had departed Halmahera and were en route to Morotai were pursued by Navy PT boats. A third was struck just short of Morotai, 2 were destroyed on the way, and the 4th landed, unloaded, and concealed in the cove of the Tijoe River exit. It was finally discovered and destroyed by a patrol of the 25th Regiment. That same day, a patrol from the 25th's 3rd Battalion saw 8 well-equipped Japanese who might have been related to the previously discovered barge just north of Libano. Although the 3rd Battalion's hunt was successful, the 25th would be transferred to the Green Islands in June, where they would once more be largely utilized for security and service purposes. The Patrols of Crawford. Under the command of Lieutenant Richard L. Crawford, Company F of the 368th Regiment launched a patrol on May 24th. The Tijoe River's famous streambed served as their starting point. Crawford's 12-man patrol swiftly located and started following a series of footprints that followed the creek as they moved inland. After 2 kilometers, the footsteps veered out of the lake and ascended a rocky slope to reach a hill covered in vegetation. Crawford's patrol continued to move discreetly when they noticed 7 Japanese troops sleeping. They were all wearing brand new spotless uniforms. The others only had pistols, and only one had a rifle. Crawford and his men watched from their hiding location, while one soldier combed his beard for a long time, gazing into a handheld mirror. The Japanese appeared less concerned with the prospect of an ambush, and more like they were getting ready for a parade. 6 people were killed when Crawford's patrol opened fire. The 7th managed to escape, but a blood trail into the jungle indicated that he had been injured. These soldiers were identified as Kempei Tai based on documentation found on the dead. Another Crawford-led patrol returned to the Tijoe River region on July 11th. For 2 weeks, this 12-man patrol was to scout the area for Japanese, particularly Colonel Uchi. They discovered a wounded Japanese soldier on their final day and captured him. He was glad to give away the location of a nearby camp, where Uchi kept his headquarters in exchange for the assistance, comfort, and meals provided to him. The patrol discovered 10 or 12 Japanese living in a 3-hut camp in a clearing. 1 enemy was killed in a brief shootout. At least 6 were injured, and the others were fleeing for their lives. Ample supplies of blankets, grenades, ammo, and rice were left behind. 2 more days of patrols produced no results. Crawford's men heard wood being cut on August 2nd. They honed in on the sound and discovered several Japanese sleeping in a 4-hut camp. Another half-dozen were going downhill to swim in the river after dropping off boxes of goods they had brought in. Crawford positioned his patrol to cover swimmers in camp and attempted to persuade the bathers to surrender. They fled into the forest after refusing. The remaining members of Crawford's team attacked the Japanese at the camp, instantly killing 7 of them. 1 man was taken prisoner, and 2 others fled into the jungle. Captain Uchi's capture. Fortunately, it was Colonel Uchi who was taken prisoner. A Japanese soldier dressed as a dead man stepped up to kill Sergeant Jack Mackenzie as he was leading Uchi away. Mackenzie shot his assailant in the head, firing his carbine from the hip without dropping his prisoner. Before Japan surrendered, Colonel Uchi was the highest-ranking Japanese officer to be captured in action. Sergeant Albert Morrison, Privates First Class Robert A. Evans, and Elmer Sloan were awarded Bronze Stars for their roles in Uchi's capture, while Sergeant Alphonsia Dillon was awarded Silver Stars. More than 600 other Japanese eventually emerged from hiding to surrender after their commander was taken prisoner. Though the men did contribute to victory in the Pacific, the 93rd Division saw very little extra combat. The division moved thousands of Allied troops from transports to staging locations and back to embarkation points, unloaded and offloaded 311,552 tons of supplies and equipment, and made improvements to roads, campsites, and harbor facilities between April 10th and July 10th, 1945. However, there were still conflicts to resolve. On July 17, 1945, a patrol from Company Y, 368th Regiment, was attacked by a Japanese force 3 times its size while on Jolo Island in the Sulu archipelago of the Philippines, which is situated between Borneo and Mindanao. Staff Sergeant Leonard E. Dowden of New Orleans, Louisiana, maneuvered his squad to within 30 yards of the Japanese while bullets were flying everywhere, but he was killed by enemy fire. Despite his severe injuries, Dowden scudded forward by himself to use grenades to attack a machine gun position. He was ready to launch a grenade when he was killed by a flash of fire. With just 18 casualties, the patrol successfully repelled the opposing attack. Staff Sergeant Dowden posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest honor for gallantry in the country, for the incredible heroism that cost him his life. During the war, he was the only person in the 93rd Infantry Division to get the DSC. The end of the war, a return to Jim Crow. Under the command of Brig. General Leonard R. Boyd, the 93rd would reach as far as Mindanao and Leyte in the Philippines by the end of the war. Due to a lack of pyrotechnics, the rifles ignited in celebration when formal news of Japan's surrender arrived. According to 369th Infantry Regiment Sergeant James Yancey, the 93rd participated in the festivities. A white cop then approached Yancey's happy group and told them to stop shooting. All of their firearms were seized. The white troops continued to celebrate while firing. The members of the 93rd received 825 military decorations for their exceptional service and courage throughout their 2 years in the Southwest Pacific, including 27 Air Medals, 686 Bronze Stars, 5 Silver Stars, 5 Legions of Merit, 1 Distinguished Service Medal, and 1 Distinguished Service Cross. On February 3, 1946, the 93rd Infantry Division went home and was decommissioned at Camp Stoneman, California, their previous port of departure. 2 years later, President Harry ordered the desegregation of the U.S. military. Truman, ESA. Many African-American soldiers had conflicting opinions regarding their wartime duty after returning to the United States. Their brief experience in combat demonstrated to some that they were equally skilled as white soldiers. Others saw their return to civilian life as a return to institutionalized discrimination, Jim Crow, laws, racism, and limitations on their personal liberties. One veteran of the 93rd Infantry Division stated, "I have to fight in the STO, USA, Southern Theater of Operations in the United States, after surviving the PTO, Pacific Theater of Operations.